The storm was relentless. Wind howled like a wild beast through the towering pines of the Blue Ridge Mountains as the Anderson family's SUV struggled along the slick, winding road. James Anderson, a seasoned firefighter, kept both hands tight on the wheel, squinting through sheets of rain that blurred the windshield. Beside him, Sarah whispered a quiet prayer, her hand protectively resting over Emily's tiny legs in the back seat. 9-month-old Noah was fastened securely in his car seat, his soft breaths barely audible beneath the roar of thunder. In the very back, Max, a German shepherd with years of canine service etched into the stiffness of his joints, sat alert, eyes fixed on the dark ahead. He had seen wildfires, rescues, chaos, but tonight something felt different. Then it happened. A screech of tires, a flash of headlights, the crunch of metal against rock. The SUV swerved violently as James lost control. The vehicle broke through the guardrail and plunged down the rain-slicked ravine. When the world stopped spinning, silence took over. Smoke began to rise from the wreckage, the faint scent of gasoline mixing with the scent of rain and broken earth. James, Sarah, and little Emily didn't move. But in the scattered debris just outside the crushed frame of the SUV, a small car seat lay on its side, mud-caked and still. Noah's tiny body was motionless, barely breathing. Beside him, Max limped from the wreckage, blood trailing from his hind leg, pain visible in every step, but his gaze never left the child, not for a second. The storm continued to rage above them, uncaring, but Max had already made a decision. This night wouldn't end here. The fire was spreading, small flames crackled near the engine, casting flickering light across twisted metal and shattered glass. Max, though dazed and bleeding, dragged his injured leg closer to the wreckage. He didn't look back. Not at the lifeless silence in the front seats, not at the collapsed back row where Emily had been. His focus was locked on the car seat lying in the dirt. Noah! The baby's face was pale, a faint smear of blood on his temple. His chest rose and fell, barely. Max nudged the seat gently with his nose, then began to whimper, as if begging the boy to respond. There was no answer. The cold wind cut through the mountain air, and Max scanned the area with trained eyes. His body screamed for rest, for safety. But instinct, something deeper than training, kicked in. James had been his partner, his family, and this child. This child was his last connection. Max grabbed the edge of a weather-worn flannel blanket from the wreck and gently draped it over Noah's tiny form, using his snout and paws with surprising care. He leaned in and licked the boy's cheek once, softly, reverently. Then he turned. His back leg trembled with each step. The pain was sharp, shooting up through his side, but he didn't stop. Clamped between his teeth was the only object he could carry, the little blue toy car that Noah always kept in his lap. Max didn't know where help was. He didn't know if there was time. But he knew one thing: he had to find someone, and he had to do it fast. The storm hadn't eased. Rain lashed down from the heavens as if trying to erase every trace of what had happened. Max moved forward with a limp, each step carving a trail of blood into the muddy earth. The pain in his hind leg was unbearable. Muscle torn, bone possibly fractured, but pain was irrelevant now. The small blue toy car swung lightly in his jaws, clinking against his teeth with every uneven step. It was more than a toy, it was a message, a symbol of urgency, and Max carried it with the same reverence he once gave to the police badge pinned to his partner's chest. The forest around him was dense, unfamiliar. Trees bent in the howling wind, their limbs groaning like mourners in the dark. Lightning split the sky overhead, illuminating his path for brief, blinding moments. Each time the light faded, he was swallowed again by the blackness of the mountain night. Twice, Max collapsed. His body simply gave out, legs buckling, chest heaving. But each time, he pushed himself back up, dragging his injured limb across rocks and roots. His fur was soaked, matted with blood and mud, but his eyes, though clouded with pain, burned with unshakable resolve. He had served for years in disaster zones, found people buried in rubble, led his team through flames and danger, but this mission, this one was different. There were no radios, no backup, no handler giving him commands. There was only a baby, barely clinging to life, waiting for someone to return with help. Max kept going. Mile after mile passed beneath him in painful silence. His senses dulled, time blurred. But just as his legs began to tremble again and the weight of exhaustion threatened to crush him, something flickered in the distance. Headlights. A patrol car. Max paused, lowered the toy car to the ground, and let out the loudest bark his lungs could manage. One cry, raw, urgent, and full of everything he had left. Officer Ethan Mitchell had seen his fair share of strange things during his late-night mountain patrols. Wild animals crossing the road, hikers stranded in bad weather. But nothing could have prepared him for what he saw when his headlights swept across the road ahead. A lone German shepherd, soaked to the bone, limping through the rain, stood in the middle of the road. At his feet sat a tiny, blue toy car. Ethan braked hard, heart pounding. The dog didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stared at the patrol car with eyes that didn't match the brokenness of his body. They were pleading. Cautiously, Ethan stepped out, hand near his holster, unsure of the situation. But something about the way the dog stood there, so still, so focused, made him pause. "What the hell happened to you, buddy?" he muttered under his breath. Max let out a hoarse bark and stepped forward, nudging the toy with his nose, then turning back toward the woods. He looked over his shoulder, waiting. Ethan crouched down, squinting at the dog's leg. It was badly injured. Blood mixed with mud trailed behind him, and yet, he was moving with purpose. Then Ethan saw the tag on the dog's old collar. Max. A name that didn't sound like a stray's. "You're not just some dog out here, are you?" Max barked again, louder this time, and took another shaky step toward the forest. And that was all Ethan needed. He grabbed his flashlight and radio, called in his location, and started following Max into the woods. The terrain was rough, the storm unrelenting, but Ethan trusted the dog without question. There was something urgent in every movement Max made. Whatever had happened, it wasn't over. Somewhere out there, someone needed help. And this dog, this injured, determined creature, was their only hope. The forest was unforgiving. Steep inclines, tangled roots, mud that swallowed Ethan's boots with every step. The rain hadn't let up, but Ethan didn't care. His flashlight bobbed through the darkness, following the slumped, shadowy figure of Max just a few yards ahead. The dog's breathing was ragged and his body swayed with each stride, but he never stopped. Every few steps, he'd glance back, making sure Ethan was still there, then push forward again, driven by something stronger than instinct. Devotion. Ethan's radio crackled uselessly with static. The mountain's signal was too weak. He was alone out here, relying solely on a wounded dog's sense of direction. And yet, somehow, he trusted Max more than he trusted his own map. After nearly 20 grueling minutes, Max slowed. The trees opened slightly to reveal the twisted metal of the Andersons' SUV, barely visible through the rain and smoke. Ethan's heart dropped. He rushed forward, scanning the wreckage with trained eyes. James and Sarah were unresponsive. Emily, gone. A heavy silence pressed into the clearing. Then, movement. Near the edge of the slope, sheltered beneath a wet blanket and nestled in a broken car seat, lay a baby. Barely moving, barely breathing. "Noah," Ethan whispered, remembering the name from the tag on the toy. He dropped to his knees beside the child, instantly assessing the boy's shallow breaths, clammy skin and pulse. Faint, but there. Alive. Max limped forward and collapsed beside them, his body finally giving in. But his eyes never left the child. Ethan grabbed his radio again, this time climbing slightly uphill to get a signal. "Dispatch, this is Officer Mitchell. I have a critically injured infant and a canine in need of immediate evac. I need EMS and fire crew now. Coordinates to follow." A long pause followed, filled only with the sound of wind and Max's labored breathing. Then, faint at first but growing stronger, came the distant cry of sirens. Relief washed over Ethan. He looked down at Max and nodded. "You did good, partner. You brought him home." Moments later, red and blue lights broke through the rain, painting hope across the wreckage. Red and blue lights flickered against the wet leaves as emergency crews arrived on the scene, boots thudding through the mud. Ethan flagged them down, his voice firm but urgent. Infant male, maybe 9 months, critical condition, German Shepherd, prior K9, also injured, prioritize both. Paramedics swarmed the site. One team gently lifted Noah from the soaked car seat, immediately checking his vitals. Pulse is weak, BP's low, let's move, an EMT called out. They wrapped the baby in thermal blankets and connected oxygen, working swiftly against the clock. Another team approached Max with caution. Though exhausted and in obvious pain, he didn't resist. He lay still, his eyes darting between the medics and the baby. It was as if he wouldn't rest until he saw Noah safe. He's in rough shape, one medic said, examining Max's leg. We'll stabilize him and transport. This dog's a hero. Ethan rode in the back of the ambulance, one hand resting on Max's damp fur, the other hovering near Noah's tiny arm. The baby's chest rose slightly, shaky but rhythmic. Hope, though fragile, was finally present. When they reached the hospital, the ER staff sprang into motion. Noah was rushed inside, doctors shouting orders, machines beeping wildly. Max, though barely able to lift his head, forced himself to rise just enough to crawl beside the gurney before being led to the animal care wing. In that moment, Ethan paused, watching the battered dog push through the pain for one reason only: to stay close. That wasn't just loyalty, that was love. The hours crawled by inside the brightly lit hospital corridors. Nurses moved swiftly, doctors barked out updates, and machines hummed a steady rhythm of urgency and hope. Ethan paced just outside the pediatric ICU, watching through the glass as a team worked on Noah. Tiny, pale, but still fighting. Inside the veterinary care unit, Max lay on a padded table, his leg wrapped in gauze, an IV delivering fluids to his worn body. The veterinary team moved quietly, carefully. He's lucky, one of them said softly. But more than that, he's strong. Strong didn't even begin to cover it. As dawn began to touch the edges of the sky, a nurse approached Ethan with a weary smile. He's stable, still critical, but he's responding. He made it through the night. Ethan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Later that morning, Max, now partially sedated but resting, was wheeled into the same wing as Noah. The hospital had made an exception. The staff knew this story had crossed the line between medical protocol and something far deeper. When the gurney rolled in, Noah stirred for the first time in hours. His tiny fingers twitched, his lips moved, as if searching for something familiar. Max raised his head weakly at the same moment. His ears flicked. Then slowly, carefully, he turned his head toward the crib beside him. They were together again. Doctors, nurses, even seasoned EMTs couldn't hold back their emotions as they watched the moment unfold. There was no sound, no bark, no cry, but the silence was loud with meaning. Ethan, standing quietly in the doorway, felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen partnerships in the force, bonds between soldiers, unspoken trust between partners in danger. But this was beyond training, beyond duty. It was family. The sky was clear that morning, calm, soft, almost reverent, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. A small crowd had gathered at the cemetery. Fellow firefighters stood in uniform, their badges gleaming under the sun. Sarah and Emily were laid to rest beside James, who had served his community with quiet bravery until his final day. As the final words of the eulogy faded into the breeze, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Max was there. His body still recovering, he moved slowly across the grass, each step deliberate. A fresh bandage wrapped his leg, and a subtle limp followed his every movement. But he made it, standing just a few feet from James's casket. Then, with almost ceremonial grace, Max raised one paw and held it in the air, a silent salute, not to a stranger, but to the man who had been his partner, his guide, his family. The moment was still, raw, and unforgettable. Tears welled in the eyes of those who watched. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a goodbye, a final act of honor from one partner to another. Later that day, back at the hospital, Noah sat propped in a small crib, color returning to his cheeks. His bright eyes scanned the room until they landed on the familiar figure padding slowly toward him. Max. No words were spoken, but something passed between them, a shared strength, a promise. Ethan, standing at the doorway, smiled as Max laid down beside the crib, no longer limping, but guarding, always guarding. From that day forward, Max stayed by Noah's side, not as a pet, not even as a rescuer, but as something far more powerful. A protector, a survivor, a family. And in that bond, unspoken and unbreakable, they found healing, not just for wounds of the body, but of the soul. In the days that followed, Noah's condition steadily improved. Doctors confirmed what everyone had hoped. He would make a full recovery. But as the paperwork settled and the reality of the tragedy set in, one heartbreaking truth remained. Noah had no surviving family. It was Ethan who stepped forward. There had been no hesitation, no second thoughts. He'd seen more than duty in that baby's eyes. He'd seen resilience. And in Max, he saw more than a dog. He saw a guardian whose loyalty refused to fade. The adoption process began almost immediately. Ethan didn't just offer a home, he offered a future. Max, still healing but stronger by the day, now trotted through Ethan's home with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged. And Noah? He giggled in his new crib, reaching for Max's ears, laughter finally replacing silence. They weren't bound by blood, but they were bound by survival, by love, by something deeper than fate. A new family, imperfect, unexpected, but exactly what each of them needed. If Max's story moved you the way it moved us, if it reminded you of the quiet power of love, loyalty, and sacrifice, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this story touched you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of the incredible bonds that can exist, even in the darkest of moments. Thank you for spending your time with us today. We hope Max, Noah, and James' journey reminded you that heroes come in all forms, and sometimes they walk on four legs.